So I know what you're thinking. Why is a man standing in front of you wearing size 14 red pumps? Well, believe it or not, these are a great visual aid for the state of engaging men in women's leadership advancement. Really, and let me tell you why. First, they represent discomfort, certainly for me at this moment. More importantly, they represent the discomfort that men have in even wanting to have this conversation with women in the workplace. Most men are afraid we'll say or do the wrong thing, and so we choose not to engage. They're also a great visual aid around men and women having very different experiences in the workplace. In my consulting practice, I talk to hundreds of men and women about what's going on in their lives. And they're having very different experiences. Both genders today are working very hard. But women leave their 60-hour week and go home to a second full-time job. In this country, women are still doing 3 times the amount of cooking, cleaning, and childcare as their male counterparts. And that has not changed for a long time. There's actually a great quote around this, and long before Dancing with the Stars, there was a famous dance duo of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. And Ginger was asked about dancing with Fred, and she said, well, Fred's a great dancer, but a woman is expected to do everything a man does flawlessly while dancing backwards and wearing high heels. I think this is a great illustration that men and women are both dancing in the workplace and having very different experiences. Next, they represent a complete violation of the man code. And yes, the man code does exist. The man code says avoid all things soft or feminine. Soft and feminine are weak, and they have no place in business today. I have to tell you, if men had to wear these just for 10 minutes, there is nothing soft or weak about these. You guys are champions for wearing these every day. Thank you. But shoes can also represent the momentum of where we are today. If we look at shoes as a representation of leadership, 17 pairs out of 20 still belong to men. And that number has not changed for about 10 years. We've actually lost momentum in this country. And so today, there are still only 3 pairs for every 17 pair of men's. And so what are we going to do about that? Well, that's the focus of our day today. Since I don't have 4,000 men sitting here, I have to ask something of all of you. How can women create momentum and lead change through male engagement? How can women create momentum and lead change through male engagement? I hate to have to ask you to do this, but men aren't going to do it on their own. We need to be invited into this conversation. And so I want to spend the next few minutes talking to you about how you engage men in a much more comfortable conversation. And so I'm actually going to get a little more comfortable. I'm going to put those up there so you can see them. And yes, the irony is not lost that I can take those off and still be in the workplace, and you can't. There's a concept known as male leader gender fatigue. Men look around the company, see a lot of women, and assume their company is doing a good job, when in fact the numbers just don't bear that out. 56% of men versus just 39% of women think women have made considerable progress in the last 10 years. Men in business, leaders don't even recognize this situation exists. So how do you go out and create champions? Well, how did I get here? Let's just say I've had some unique gender experiences. I'm going to share a couple with you that no man should go through, but they really create moments in your life to tell these stories and go back and engage others. It was 1983. I was working for Procter & Gamble. We had just introduced Always Feminine napkins with patented stay dry technology. I had a sales kit I would go in grocery stores and I would stand with a Stay Free in one side and an Always in the other. And I had blue water. And I would pour it in both of those. And I was trained to grab the grocery buyer's hand, always a man in those days, and say, doesn't the dry weave feel softer? After about 20 presentations, I actually ran into a woman. I was paying no attention. I broke into my sales presentation, and as I said, doesn't the dry weave feel softer? She looked at me and said, have you ever worn one? I would happily leave Procter & Gamble in a couple years. I'd go to work at Coca-Cola. Flash forward 15 years, I'm working in sales training. And literally overnight, I went from working in sales training to working in diversity education. Coca-Cola had a major discrimination lawsuit. And I'm a straight white guy, and they put me in charge of diversity education. And it was that really bad diversity training. You've all seen that episode of The Office? That was my program. And I sat in there day after day after day. And I didn't want to be there any more than the participants did. And then one day, a colleague of mine, African-American gentleman from Columbus, Ohio, stood up and told a story. He said he's vice president. He drives a white Jaguar and lives in a very nice suburb of Columbus. And at least once a month, on his drive home from work, he is pulled over for no other reason than being a black man in a nice car in a nice neighborhood. And he said the lowest day of his life was when he got pulled over, and his 14-year-old son was sitting next to him. And all you can do in your anger and outrage is drop your hands in your lap and be as polite as possible, because you know in a few years your son is going to get pulled over. And the way you react in that moment is the way your son is going to react. And I heard that and it changed me. I'm the father of a son. And I knew I would never experience that for my children in my life. And I had what they call a white male epiphany, where you realize what white male privilege is and the world revolves around me. I became very active in the diversity space for the next 10 years. I would learn that women are really the linchpin. If we can't get companies to have an honest conversation around women, then why are we going to talk about race or sexual orientation or any other of a host of diversity subjects? And so, in doing so, we have to get good at this gender conversation. And I want to go back and revisit just one topic, and it's called this man code, right? Avoid all things feminine. This is drilled into every little boy from the time we step foot on the playground. 40 years later, this is a business cultural norm, and it's very hard to change. Another tenet of the man code says, be a winner. Be a winner to men means I win and you lose. And in my mind, if I'm advocating for women, then men must, by default, be being left behind. When in fact, the data doesn't support that. 3 out of 4 promotions in this country are still going to men. There's another one called be tough. Be emotionally tough. Put work before family. And face time is important. And I hope this trend is going away. But these are all deeply rooted cultural norms that we have to get really good at talking about. So how do you engage men in this conversation? What you need to do is have a head and heart connection. So I want to spend just a couple minutes talking about the head piece, this business case. I've really got to understand this as a leader, so I'm not just doing this soft, feminine, women's advancement thing. As I go around and talk to groups, the business case today is overwhelming. There are macro trends colliding in the workplace that are bringing this around. Our earlier speaker talked about millennials. Today, you can't talk about women without talking about millennials, without talking about multiculturalism. 85% of new entries into the workforce are women and minorities. 85% are women and minorities. Said another way, only 15% are white men. What do you mean? Are white men disappearing? Yeah, well, believe it or not, we kind of are. 35% of the population is checking multiple boxes on the census. So the workforce looks significantly different, and it's getting much younger. And we already heard that millennials don't want to go to work for your company. Additionally, if you need a bright, educated workforce, chances are it's women. Women are getting 58% of the bachelor's degrees and 60% of the master's degrees in this country. The number one major in school for the women going to school is entrepreneurship. So I don't want to work for your company. I'm not even going to join your company. This is all compounded by 10,000 boomers a day leaving the workforce. And they all look just like me. They're all older white men. And so these trends, these macro trends are colliding to create this business case. And then there's one more issue taking place, and that is most companies are focused on fix the women programs. Go take one more course, go take one more rotational assignment, and you'll be good enough and ready enough to get promoted. Let me tell you, you're already good enough. Programs are not driving progress. That's the business case. Thank you. But to drive action, you need the heart piece. And the heart piece is a personal connection. Most men, when we leave for work, we put on our suit of armor, and we don't even think about our family. We just go out and do battle. And unless there's something on our day timer, we just forget that they exist. And that's true, ladies, and you need to know that. As a boomer dad, though, I tried to be a good father. Whether it was dance or soccer, I made the game. I supported my daughter. I made sure she went to a great college. But the day she graduates and makes 78 cents to my son, I choose to do nothing. I choose to stop advocating for one of the most important people in my life. Fathers of daughters in this country need to be outraged that organizations and society only value our daughters at 78 cents on the dollar. Only men can choose to fix that. We've got to get angry, and we've got to do so with a sense of urgency. And so that's my message for you to take back, this head and heart connection. That's how you're going to drive action, and you have to go out and do this. How can women create momentum and lead change through male engagement? Talk to us about the business case. Talk to us about our daughters and our sons and why this is so important. And talk to them about shoes. Remind them of the first little pair of shoes their daughter wore and all the hopes and dreams you had for her. And then talk to them about all the other shoes women will wear in their life and how you're supporting your daughter by supporting women in the workforce today. At the end of the day, it's not about putting men in women's shoes. It's about fathers of daughters realizing the responsibility they have to drive change in this country for their daughters and for their sons. Thank you very much.